Hey all, welcome back. So this week we're looking at cycling and the evolution of mass participation in modern sport. And just a bit of a recap of where we've been recently. We've been talking about modern sport. And I introduced you to Alan Gutman, and he gives us these typologies of modern sport, which boil down to secularism, equality, and a bunch of others that we can group together under standardization. And all this, as I said, is predicated on the American system of production, which in turn is based on the pursuit and ultimate mastery of interchangeability, okay, which is key to purpose-built machines, and it happens in weaponry first, in the armory system. And we saw that there was a huge investment in the United States uh, by the federal government in the armory system, in producing an interchangeable rifle, which everyone in the world wanted. But from the outset, we have here in the armory production an intentional creation of an industrial consciousness, also through parting out to other manufacturers, and then also the point that these purpose-built machines that are the trick to interchangeability can then be replicated in all these other industries, and that's exactly what happens. And that so we get this massive manufacturing base in America, the American system of production, really the beginning of their second industrial revolution, and industrialization, hyper industrialization after the Civil War, the Gilded Age. Now this translates into sports too, because here in New England, in North America, we get our first mass manufacturing of sports equipment. Okay, late 19th century, we see standardized sports equipment for the first time being mass manufactured for the first time. Before that, we don't see this. Before this, players had to make their own equipment, and think of what that does. That a few things. One is it kept participation down. Interestingly, it also impacted negatively on the level of play and on competition. The quality of play is uneven. So yeah, industrialization, a really big game changer. Okay, so that was a bit of recap. And I also mentioned that in Canada we had CCM, right? And being the first big manufacturer here. First in the United States, and much bigger than CCM, is Spalding. And this is the story of Albert Spalding. And we talk about him in our baseball lecture. He's a pitcher. He's originally playing for the Boston Red Stockings, later plays for Chicago, and he's a pitcher with sore hands. So he starts wearing a glove. Now he's not the first to do that, but because he's a big name player, he popularizes a glove, and he's the first to see that there's a market in these. So he sets up a store in Chicago and starts selling them. Gets into manufacturing ball gloves by 1874. Soon enough, he's got this massive factory in Chicopee Falls, Massachusetts. Fun to say, right near the Springfield Armory. So again, awesome how this all connects. And again, this is 1874. Soon enough, he gets a contract for the National League. So he's the supplier for all equipment in that league, which he's a founding originator in any case. So, and the other thing, and this is important in cycling, which is where we're going, is that what everyone is learning is that mass manufacturing requires mass consumption. It's not it begins with demand, but to keep that going, you need to make sure that that mass demand continues. So mass consumption has to continue, and mass manufacturing depends on that, right? Because otherwise you saturate your market, and there's nothing left to sell. And any case, we're getting into the Phoebus cartel and the light bulb and built-in obsolescence, but um, we don't have to do that. Enough to know that you have to create and grow that market. Okay, so the way to do that in sports is a variety of ways. You create how-to manuals, you make guides, you make rule books, you sponsor athletes. And this starts happening in the late 19th century for the first time. And then you write biographies of them. So you create sports heroes. Now, this is all very intentional. It's all very deliberate, this creation of the national icons. And they become this advertising phenom then that sells the sport and sells equipment, especially increasing trend towards this in the early 20th century. And again, mass production requires mass consumption. So you have to grease those wheels, so to speak. Now, the best early example of that in sport is the bicycle, and the bicycle craze of the late 19th century. Yeah, so cycling becomes massively popular sport at the end of the 19th century, towards the turn of the century. But its history goes back to much earlier in the 19th century. 1817 in Germany, we get a big first with the Draisine. Now, this is basically just a pedestrian accelerator, but this is the outset, and this is created by some Baron von Dries or something or other. It's got no pedals; you steer with a lever. After that, we get something with pedals on the front axle. That's a big step, and that's called the bone shaker, generally known as that for good reason, because it's got wooden wheels, and then you get the first pedal bicycle in the 1860s. So the pedal is added in France in the 1860s. Again, this bike is made entirely of wood. Later on, it has metal wheels. Finally, in 1869, we get the penny farthing invented, also known as the ordinary. Now, there's a whole bunch of great videos out there online that show the evolution of the bicycle over time, so I really encourage you to check those out. Here's one of them, and this one is linked in our PowerPoint, so you can watch the whole thing. But it's a Dutch documentary that in a few minutes takes you through the entire evolution of the bicycle. And it's very cool, uh, with some great campy music for you to enjoy. But we're not going to watch the whole thing. But just suffice to say, there are some interesting steps along the way in the creation of the bicycle. But yeah, the penny farthing really is a big moment, the ordinary. And this gets exhibited in 1876 in Philadelphia at the Centennial Exhibition. So invented 1869, exhibited in America in Philadelphia in 1876. Exhibitions at this time really important, because this isn't just World's Fairs like today. This is really transfer of technology. Technology transfer happens at these exhibitions in the past, in the 19th century. And that totally makes sense in an era before radio, before mass circulation magazines, that this is how people would learn about other technologies. In any case, a U.S. manufacturer, Albert Pope, went there. Okay, Albert Pope. Now, he had a factory in Boston, Pope, where he was making tools for the shoemaking industry. He sees the bicycle exhibit and is totally stoked by it. And he thinks there's a potential market here in America for this. Absolutely, maybe I can manufacture them. He goes to England to try it out. Better roads in England. Yeah, and then he gets into making them. And in fact, the argument is that he is really the true originator of mass production using assembly lines, okay, which we associate with Ford and what is later is called Fordism, okay. But there is an argument that really it is him, and in fact, there's a really great article out there that you can find about Popism. Albert Pope being the one who originates all this. It's definitely not a term you've heard. Um, but yeah, there's a very good argument for that, because he absolutely uses not one but several assembly lines. He's the first to have people, his workers, stand in one place and have parts brought to them as they assemble them. He's the first to be accused of turning men into machines, into automatons, right? Which Ford definitely, he fields complaints about that his entire life. And he's also as much about building the consumer market as he is about building his bicycles. Okay, so he does things like set up bicycle training academies. He sponsors races. He sponsors bicycle clubs, and he creates the Wheelman magazine. Okay, he also gets into the Better Roads movement, which is a big part. That also transfers later on to the automotive industry, which gets big time into the Better Roads movement. But all of that to grow his market, right? As with Ford, he's obsessed with the per unit price. He has this lifetime obsession with that lean manufacturing, and his aim is to produce one bike a minute, just later presaging what Ford would later do, while trying to create one Model T every single minute, and eventually getting successfully doing that. Now, Albert Pope is not alone, obviously, and there's a lot of interest in what the British have produced, including with Canadians. And in Canada, initially, there's a really big market for Pope's high wheelers. And in Montreal, the first high wheeler is imported in 1876 by a guy named A.T. Lane. And allegedly, the mayor of Montreal was so impressed that he calls a half-day holiday so everyone can get out and see A.T. Lane ride through the city. Okay, and Lane, he ends up setting up shop and selling American high wheelers. So he probably had an in with the mayor, if this story is true, because that's definitely a good promotion for his sales. But in any case, The market is limited for people like Lane, okay, and for people like Pope at the time. And that's because the high wheeler was an exclusively male hobby. And this partly gets to the fact of women's clothing at the time. They can't even climb up on this thing in Victorian clothing. Second thing is, it is expensive. Okay, they're expensive toys. $120 was the minimum price for a high wheeler initially. And so yeah, wealthy people can buy them. And in fact, John D. Rockefeller bought a whole bunch of. He bought 1 year. He bought 38 from Albert Pope. He's the big robber baron who owns Standard Oil. In any case, he gave them to his employees that he thought needed the most exercise. But they're exclusive male hobby too, because they are dangerous, right? And of course, that only makes them more attractive to young men. So they're really a lot, largely about racing, and 100% they are unsafe. Okay, because that higher that front wheel is, the faster it is, and that's why that front wheel got bigger and bigger over time, right? There's also no gears, right? Bigger wheel. Further you go with one push. Okay, and by 1878 we got a 7-foot high front wheel, 84 inches. Okay, everyone wants the biggest front wheel possible. 60 inches is standard, but as I said, 84 inches is out there. So yeah, exclusively male hobby, and basically, men would get the biggest wheel that they could, given the leg that their legs will allow. So you get the largest diameter wheel that your legs will allow. And that's especially true if you're a competitor and doing a lot of racing like these guys here. The rear wheel, by the way, is as small as possible because it is a dead weight. It's only there for balance, right? And also dangerous because you are sitting really under the handlebar. Okay, you're sitting under the handlebar. Your legs are trapped. So when you do a header, which often happens and inevitably will happen, it often means a face plant, which actually is better because if you try to break your fall from that height, you break your wrists, and when you break both of them, you know what that means. Okay, and this happens very frequently. I mean, it's obvious why these things are totally unsafe. And you hit a rock, you hit a soft patch on the road, right? You go down a hill too fast, and you will wipe out. You will do a header for sure. And pretty soon, everyone is getting what's known as a chauffeur's fracture. Okay, chauffeur's fracture, and they're called that because back in the day when cars didn't have starters, that wasn't until Cadillac invented the electric starter in 1917, started putting them in their cars. Before that, you had to crank a car from the front. That's how you started them, right? And these things had a lot of kick to them. And if they kick back, they could break your wrist. And so that was called a chauffeur's fracture. And yeah, pretty soon, late 19th century, everyone's getting chauffeur's fractures. And early taste of the nursing home experience if you break both your wrists. And this happened to me out in Harborview Road at dusk. I'm biking. I tapped the front brakes too hard. Not obviously not in an ordinary penny farthing a mountain bike, but and yeah, I broke one, and that's what it looks like. Okay, chauffeur's fracture. This is what they do nowadays. They put a lot of hardware in to fix a broken wrist. In any case, it's interesting stuff, and guess what is ground zero in North America for the chauffeur's fracture is Whistler Squamish. And the emergency departments there in Whistler and Squamish, they know all about this. And in fact, when the American Association for Hand Surgery was investigating this, and they wanted to do a study on hand surgery, that's where they found over 1,000 cases. Okay, so that's where they published a massive study just based on cases from the Squamish Whistler area, because mountain bike heartland, right? Any case, now the tire on these ordinaries too is made of hard rubber, so it is not shock absorbent. There's also no brakes on these early bikes. It's what's called a spoon brake, which kind of operates like it sounds. It pushes down on the wheel, slows you down a bit, but it's not really a good brake. In fact, you don't want good brakes because that would make it even more dangerous. That's what happened to me. You tap the brake too hard, break your wrist. Now, go online if you want some comical videos of people wiping out and really great, awesome ways in their on penny farthings or ordinary bikes. It's pretty awesome stuff. There's a lot out there. This is just one of them. This guy going down a hill and completely bailing. Now it's interesting to me that the Canadians put a more safe spin on the penny farthing or the ordinary bike by adapting them for use in the winter. And here you have, this is the only reference I found to this. This is from the Canadian Illustrated News, and they're calling it an ice velocipede. And apparently, and it says there under the article or under the picture, our illustration represents an everyday scene on the river near Montreal where the ice velocipede is in everyday use. So go figure. But if you take a look at that date, 1870, that messes with the narrative of the AT lane and coming up in 1876 with the first one. But in any case, who knows? This exists. This is out there, and yeah, there are safer ways to use them and to enjoy them as a winter sport, evidently in Canada at the time. Okay, so to expand the market, which is what all the manufacturers, Pope included, want to do, you start getting improvements on the high wheeler. And the first is a spring saddle. Okay, so that's shock absorbing, and that helps a lot. Then you have so a shock absorbing saddle, great, but you still have the problem of canning yourself. So this is when you get the bike jockey strap invented, which is the origins of the jock strap. This is 1874 by some guy in Chicago. You also get better stability as cross spokes are invented. And then the pneumatic tire, that's a big one. John Dunlop, Ireland, patents that in 1888. His first efforts in that direction, not great. These were balloon tires that blew up, but by 1888, he's got a good patent for a solid inflatable tire, much more shock absorbing. Okay. Now, one direction not taken was the 1889 American Eagle. So this is invented in 1889, and you can see here that it's backwards. You've got the smaller wheel on the front instead, so that you keep your speed, but you get better stability. Ends up being a technological dead end, but someone did ride one apparently from Connecticut all the way to San Francisco, so 3,300 miles in a promotional event. Any case, yeah, regardless of minor improvements for a cyclist's comfort, the high wheeler is dangerous. And yeah, as I said, if you race these, you will fall. You race any distance, you'll fall several times, and that's expected. But massively popular in the late 19th century, they're pretty much a must-own thing for men under 30 or 35. And it becomes a very popular sport, which is the sport on which the later bicycle craze, the much bigger bicycle craze, will be built. Okay? Very popular sport. And starts in Canada, it starts in Montreal, where we have the MAAA creates the first bicycle club. Okay, the Montreal Amateur Athletic Association, and creates the first racing. Now, many of these guys in the bicycle club are the same that were in the snowshoe club, in lacrosse, and the rest of that. And now they're all about bike racing. In early days, they have a lead on the rest of Canada, and they do quite a lot to promote it. They have an annual meet that they host. They have this great track, a velodrome, which is not cheap. All right, small towns will race on horse tracks, but the MAAA has a dedicated velodrome that they can host big events for Ontario groups or other places that would come out. And they start these various competitions. So you'll have competitions like the obstacle competition, the no hands competition, the distance competition. There's also this hill event that they have, the MAA, over Mount Royal, where they're setting speed records for going up and down Mount Royal. Now, the MAA to this day is still hosting a whole lot of world competitions. The Women's World Cup for years was held by them in Montreal, and today there's a men's Grand Prix event every year, which is in the UCI World Tour Circuit, the Union Cycliste International. Anyways, 1880s, it takes off with young men everywhere. The high wheeler. Everyone wants to be what's called a scorcher then. So they're joining clubs, and towns and cities are building velodromes, or they'll race on horse tracks, as I said. And we get some really big winners and some amazing cups. Look at this impressive silver cup here of the MAA. W.G. Ross, what a man. 31 medals here, completely covered in them. So yeah, very cool. Lots of trophies, lots of respect that you can get at this time as a scorcher. So W.G. Ross, he becomes a real name, a household name for a time. George Beers, he wins Dentist of the Year. He didn't get a trophy. All he got was a little plaque. There's your joke of the day. I'm really sorry. I will cease and desist from more jokes, but I have to tell you, someone stole my limbo trophy. Like, how low can you go? Any case, Notman Studios does very well with all these scorchers. Everyone wants their picture done on or with their new machine, so we get that kind of thing happening. And we get clubs starting up in Ontario and in the Maritimes and pretty much everywhere. Scorchers. Again, it's a young man sport. And it's very, very rare that a woman will get up on a high wheeler. And the age made it improper. Again, given the clothing of the time, it's impossible to do this without being unrespectable. And it's also just young men. In the Victorian era, older guys do not get into sport. And other than maybe cricket, you hang up your cleats at 40, and that's the cultural norm, right? And this in particular, this is difficult, this is dangerous. The scorchers are young, and because the bike is relatively expensive, around $100 Canadian, that's about 4 months' wages for an average factory worker. Like everything else, this is English Canadian middle class, focused originally in Montreal, but again, the English Canadian middle class of young men. Okay? And then suddenly everything changes. The market is blown wide open, and that's the safety bicycle. Now, the revolution that happens with the safety bicycle is so profound that really this is a whole other lecture almost. So I'm putting this as part two of our lecture. So if this was a movie, this would be your intermission. Here's the points that we're getting as we head into the second half of today's lecture, and beginning with this incredibly consequential development of the safety bicycle, the social and technological revolution, as I'm calling it there. And yeah, with the safety bicycle, the market is blown wide open. And this is invented in 1885, again in England. And primarily it is the solution to the danger issues of the ordinary. And pay attention to its design. It is chain driven. Okay, so this means the wheels can be the same size, because in the ordinary, you need the front wheel is bigger because your pedals are there is no chain, so the front wheel is where you are getting the different size wheels is how you're getting your momentum, right? But with a chain, you can have the front and rear chain rings of different sizes where the wheels are the same size. So that's where you're getting your momentum, is in the differently sized front and rear chain rings. Okay, and the original safety bicycle was a fixed gear bike. And yeah, but with this, so a fixie, basically, if you have a fixie today, pretty cool. That was the original safety bike. Later on, different speeds are added, but with the right gear ratio, you get the same speed as you had with the bigger wheel in the penny farthing. So now you can have smaller wheels without a loss in speed. And it's got this massive and immediate uptake with both men and women. Okay? So it is a huge game changer. It's also much cheaper to make. And this also explains why sales exploded. Now, Albert Pope doesn't have a corner of this, and in Canada and the United States, everybody starts making these safety bicycles, and that includes all the big gun makers of the old armory system that had contracted out to the armories. Winchester, Colt, and Remington, they all become bike manufacturers. Everybody does. Okay? And at its peak, which is 1897, there are more than 300 companies in North America putting out over 1 million bicycles per year. And historians call this period the bicycle craze. So, and it's just getting started, because the following year, 2 million bikes are made. 1898, again over a million. And we have 4 million bikes being produced in about a 3-year time period. Now, this is a time when Canada's population is only 7 million. So it tells you, just how popular they've become. And cheap, right? In 1890, a bicycle cost a few months' wages. 1895, the cost is a few weeks' wages, right? And this is also when Albert Pope becomes massive, right? He had 2,000 employees now, and he's making a bicycle every minute on his assembly lines. right? And now it's become much, much cheaper than its main competitor, which to the ordinary was the horse. Okay, now it's by far got a head lead on that, right? Coincidentally, the horse is now getting more expensive because cities are growing, and the cost of stabling horses is growing exponentially with that, and feeding them. So all that works in tandem to make the bicycle a big success, the safety bicycle a big success. And to park on that point for just a bit here, as an affordable alternative to the horse, one horse buggy and harness costs as much as 12 bicycles by the turn of the century during the bicycle craze. Great quote from the time period too. The safety bicycle is never tired, never eats, drinks, or sleeps, will not run away, does not kick or bite, right? And this shows the number of immigrants coming to Canada between 1852 and 2014, and you can see there in the late century just this massive, massive uptick of Europeans coming to North America. We've become a real immigration nation, and we're not alone. The Americans are the same way, and with that we get urbanization, and again with that massive increases in the cost of horse ownership. So what used to be common, even in urban settings, less so now, coincident with the rise of the safety bicycle. Now, the impact of the bicycle on the economy is super significant, and some claim the bicycle was the first mass manufactured consumer durable. Now I'm not 100% confident in that. I think it might well have been the sewing machine, the Isaac Singer sewing machine, which is less sexy, but in any case, that's also a durable. But the bicycle is a bigger investment, and yeah, many claim it is the first mass manufactured consumer durable. In any case, what is not of debate is that it has a big impact on the economy, and that this really is, it's really at the ground floor of a shift that's happening in North America towards a consumer economy. First place in the world where we see this, okay? And that's both in Canada and in the United States. And that simply means the growth of personal consumption as a percentage of the gross domestic product over government spending or whatever, okay? It's enormous, to the point, and I have a couple of graphs here that show it in the States and in Canada. Unfortunately for Canada, we don't have a recent graph I could find that shows how much consumer spending is as a proportion of that growth, that staggering growth in GDP over time. But it is the same as the States. It's in the high 60s to 70 always, okay, and it's been there for a long while, and in fact it's got us into this kind of intractable economic problem where consumer debt is what fuels an economy that can get overheated, as we saw in 2008, and crash, but then the only solution, the only viable solution, is to convince those same consumers to start spending again. Okay, so spending beyond your means really is the North American way, and the bicycle is on the ground floor of this fairly amazing story. But yeah, and you see it in the fact, and a couple points here I've made on the PowerPoint, that a staggering number of 25% of all patents in the 1890s in North America were related to the bicycle, and that sounds crazy, but here's an article from a journal called Dress, which who knew that there's a journal called Dress? But in any case, it talks about the patents for women's cycling attire in the 1890s, and there's a good number of those just in women's cycling attire alone. And then this other amazing statistic that in the first 4 months of 1896, we had 450 patent applications in England just for bicycle tires. Okay? So this is really a fundamental shift. It's a massive impact on the economy. And Canadian manufacturers totally cash in on this. In fact, we become a big exporter to the rest of the Commonwealth, which is kind of interesting. We had this protected imperial market, and we were the dominant player in that market. And everyone in Canada is making some kind of bike accessory. And you can see that here in the Eaton's catalog, a couple pages from the Eaton's catalog. That top right is a female bicycle costume, and then some other accessories. So yeah, it can be brakes, seats, chains, lamps, bells, right? Mud guards, panniers, all these kind of things, right? So patent explosion throughout North America, and a CCM becomes a really big manufacturer in Canada, and again to the entire British Empire. So Australia, New Zealand, all these other countries are getting a lot of Canadian bicycles and Canadian bike components. The third point I want to make, and that one of the most important points of the safety bicycle, the main implications of that is it challenges and crosses gender norms. Okay, and the wider story here is in the Victorian era, women had been fighting for a very long time to free themselves of confining clothing of this fashion that dictated that middle and upper class women had to wear these corsets made of whalebone, had to go for that hourglass figure whether they had one or not, and invariably nobody does. And there's this whole reform movement specifically aiming its guns at that. At the clothing industry and these clothing norms. And in fact, there was a famous dress reformer in America called Amelia Bloomer. She'd been in this fight since the 1850s, and she created something called the bloomer that she tried to popularize, but was widely mocked for this. Okay? By the 1880s, there's something called the Rational Dress Society formed in England. Now, these are radical feminists, right? They get no respect whatsoever. But then the bicycle comes along, and what a miracle, right? This is the game changer. Women on a bike, it turns out they need the full use of their lungs. And it's also not safe to be wearing this confining Victorian clothing on a bicycle. Bloomers are perfect, right? So women start using the bicycle as a rationale for wearing bloomers. And yeah, at first it's acceptable on bicycle outings and for safety reasons. But of course, it's the thin edge of the wedge, as everyone fears, and gradually bike attire becomes everyday wear. And it reminds me totally of Lululemon, right? First, it's just yoga, it's at the gym, and next thing you know, right, it's everywhere. Okay, so yeah, and like with the first bloomers, you become the butt of a lot of jokes. There's my dad joke for you, but in any case, not a good one. But it is a massive game changer. And it is understood as such. And here is a feminist leader, Susan B. Anthony. Great quote from hers. The bicycle has done more for the emancipation of women than anything else in the world, allowing women to throw off their corsets and bustles in favor of common sense dressing. So an important theme here, sports as emancipatory for women, okay? A pathway to equality, to breaking gendered norms, and certainly not the last time it would play that role. And the next and last point on the safety bicycle is with this bicycle now, even more, cycling becomes a serious competitive sport in Canada, as it is all over the world. Okay, and in the 1890s, it becomes one of the top three. So you've got lacrosse, baseball, and cycling. Okay, and baseball and cycling vying for second spot. It's not like it's 1, 2, 3 all the time. But in any case, it's not just for scorchers now. It's for what are now known as wheelmen. Okay, wheelmen. And one of the first and most important events in Canada, there's a few national and international competitions that the Canucks are following, but the big one in Canada is the Dunlop Trophy race, which gets set up in 1894. So the Dunlop Trophy race, remember John Dunlop, he's the Irishman that invented pneumatic tire, and he is sponsoring this race. So and promoting bike racing all over the place. Now this race starts in downtown Toronto at the Woodbine Horse Track, not quite downtown, but that's the start and finish of a 20-mile race that goes east of the city and back again on fixies. So everyone is on a single fixed gear bike without brakes. And they're in pelotons, in teams of 10. And this is a really big one that goes on for 30 years. There's also global competitions in Canada, and the main one being the World Championships. And the MAA in Montreal hosted the World Cycling Championships in 1899. 30,000 spectators come out for that in a city that then had 300,000 people, so 10% of the entire population. And then you start getting a distance race. And by the way, this African-American Major Taylor from Indianapolis, he makes a name for himself in both in the Dunlop race and in Montreal in 1899. And as I said before, the MAA continues to host the UCI Grand Prix, men's Grand Prix event to this day. But then you start getting these distance racing events. And that's in the early 20th century. And at this point, this crazy phenom called the 6-day race becomes the thing. Okay, now this comes from England, and in fact, apparently they still have this event in Europe. It's track racing, and it's basically logging as much distance as you can over 6 days and 6 nights. So from midnight Sunday to midnight Saturday. Now, initially, this 6-day race is of single cyclists, so it's not a team thing, one person, right? So it's basically a fight against exhaustion. How much sleep can you do without, and how it's insane. And this is really par for the course of that time, Victorian era. They love these kind of events, and lots of heavy betting on them, of course. Then it becomes a two-man team, and that becomes a lot more realistic. 6-day race stays big for a very long time, and very big here in the 1920s and 1930s, when you start to see it all over North America. And you start to see some really big money in sponsorships and some big names as well. And for a time, the biggest of all was this one Canadian named Torchy Pedden. So Torchy, who's William Pedden, and his if you're from Victoria and you know Wharf Street, you'll see the family name on a feed mill store right across from Swan's there in the Market Square. In any case, that building on Wharf Street, that's where his father owned a business, and he got big into cycling. And really big. Okay, he becomes king of the 6-day race. He entered 148 of these and won over half of them. He also set a world record in 1929 in the 6-day race, and that record held for 12 full years. So he's quite a phenom. And he starts out as an amateur, and in fact, he ends up on the Canadian Olympic team in 1928. And yeah, that shows how cycling's come of age. It becomes an Olympic sport in 1928. It's a demonstration sport. There was 6 categories, all men-only events, and Pedden heads the Canadian team. He wins 3 gold medals, including the 1 mile and the 5 mile. And Canada there, by the way, comes in 6th overall of 149 nations, which is really not bad for a tiny country. Pedden then stays in Europe for a year, and he joins and competes in the European cycling circuit, and then ends up back in North America. It comes full circle when he ends up as an Olympic coach. But before that, he gets into motor-paced sprinting, which is what a lot of cyclists were getting into. Now, Pedden is doing very, very well in the 1930s. He's making very good money. And because cycling is quite cheap to get into it, anyone can get into it, it becomes very big during the Depression. And in fact, he makes $50,000 in 1930 in combined competitions, at a point where Babe Ruth, the biggest name in sport, made $80,000. So only Lou Gehrig and Babe Ruth made more than Pedden did in competitions in 1930, which is fairly incredible. But yeah, cycling is exciting, and guys like this push the envelope. And the big thing is, of course, how fast it can be clocked, and that's why it then heads into this motor-paced sprinting thing, where you're drafting behind a motorbike or behind a car. Super unsafe, as one of the champions in this area finds out. Henry Elks ends up being crushed and killed in a race. But Pedden gets up to 73 miles an hour, 150 kilometers an hour drafting behind a car, which remains a record for a very long time. Okay, now that record, by the way, if we look at what happens later. And what happens is, as you'd anticipate, is his record is completely destroyed as technology changes. And by the 1960s, we have a Frenchman who manages to go over 200 kilometers an hour in this sport and survive, and which really doubles what Pedden had been able to do earlier in the 1930s. And by 2018, Denise Muller-Koronek sets the new world record at almost 300 kilometers an hour on a carbon bike. So I really encourage you to watch this YouTube, because it's quite incredible. This is at the Bonneville Salt Flats, and pay attention, particularly at about the 40 to 45 second point in the video, because that's where the tether is cut. So they're tethered to to the vehicle ahead, and then she just stays inches behind that pace car for a full-on minute anyway afterwards. So that is what that sport is. It's really clearly a bit of a fixed game about getting up to that speed. You're assisted in getting up to that speed, but in any case, it's just an FYI on where that has gone since then. In terms of where it's gone for Canada, we can still do well there, but we don't really rank as a nation of cycle enthusiasts. And a good reason for that, probably, and you can see here Canadian children cycling to school in different countries, and Canada's pretty abysmal there. The weather definitely plays a big role in this in our country. But we can still do well there. And Clara Hughes proved that in the 1990s Olympics, and she is the only athlete to have won multiple medals at the Summer and Winter Olympics. Definitely mountain biking is a big deal, especially in Western Canada. And we have other notables like Ryder Hegedal, who made us all proud when he got the Giro d'Italia in 2012. He's the first Canadian to win a Grand Tour race. And every year in Victoria, he sponsored his own Ryder Hegedal race here in town on the island. But yeah, in that whether he was on performance-enhancing drugs at the time or not is not clear. He admits that he had been, but he's vague about when he stopped, which really is a segue to an interesting paradox about the sport of cycling. It's a really unique sport in that cheating is endemic, as the Lance Armstrong phenom taught us. But try to find a sport that relies more on informal rules or a sportsmanship code of ethics or etiquette, right? Like that, and specifically that if you're in a race and the opponent stops, one for a nature break, which means going to the bathroom, or secondly for a mechanical, a breakdown, you wait. And that is the unwritten rule of high-level cycling sport. Which is this fascinating paradox that written rules are systemically ignored. Cheating, doping is systemic, has been for years, but you're shamed. You're an absolute pariah if you violate the unwritten ethical code of waiting for someone taking a nature break or mechanical. And if you're not convinced of that, look up Alberto Contador 2010. You'll see what I'm talking about on that side. So I mentioned weather as being a big factor, and sport reflects culture. Okay, so, and we have to believe as well that being the second most motorized, most auto-dependent country really in the world, definitely in the G8, really limits Canadian mass participation in cycling. So not only climate. Now, the last point I want to make and that's my segue really to the last point I want to make on the bicycle and cycling in terms of the wider picture of the evolution of modern sport and industrialization. And I promised my last one was the last one. I forgot there was a fifth point, but is that when it comes to modernity, the bicycle has played what you would call a paradoxical role. So it's not just cycling that has its own paradox as a sport, but the bicycle itself has played a paradoxical role in our history. And by that, I mean what the bicycle created socially, technologically, and competitively, all of that transfers over to the automobile. Okay? And you see that nowhere better than in the Better Roads movement, which I mentioned earlier, right? It's really the bicycle craze that creates this mass movement. It is cyclists that organize, and it's bicycle manufacturers that help organize these cyclists, and Albert Pope being the big name here behind the Better Roads movement. And so what these manufacturers do is they create clubs, and Pope creates the American Wheelman, the Canadian Wheelman. They have their own magazine and their own newspapers. And through these clubs, one of the things they do is they lobby federal, state, provincial governments for paved roads for bicycles. So they lobby to get better roads put in and have what back then was called macadamizing. Okay, they called paving roads macadamizing. So this is what they're all about. But the thing is, and here's the paradox, just as soon as we do start to see these roads and they have some success in this direction, we get Henry Ford's Model T starts selling as of 1908. His production line goes into full bore, and cars become affordable. And so we get these roads for cyclists, and then vehicles are taking them over and pushing the cyclists off. Uh, and it's not completely linear, and they don't simply give up. Okay, so as these bike lobbies, cyclist groups are losing out to the vehicle, and they see that, they switch gears and they take, and that was not an intended pun, they lobby for and they get recognition of the bike as a vehicle. Now that begins in Ontario in 1897 through the court system. Okay, and the bicycle gets the same rights on the road as the automobile, and then in most places that works, right? So it was a bit of a fight, but the bicycle gets recognized in law as a vehicle. Now, same rights to the road. But the thing is really not in practice. Okay, so de facto, yes, but not in practice. And in practice, the bike is really shoved off to the curb, literally. And the onus is put on the cyclist to be safe rather than the driver, to watch out for the cars. And that's certainly been the case for most of the 20th century and only starting to shift in very recent times. Okay? Second place you see the paradox is in technology. And by that I mean bicycle innovation, the patents, all of that directly transfers to the vehicle, to the car. And the first automobiles, when you look at them, they're basically bicycles or tricycles with an internal combustion engine that would go have maybe 1 horsepower. Right? The Benz patent Motorwagen of 1885 is a great example. There it is, very basic. Henry Ford's first quadricycle. There you go, with his little rudder there. Again, all sorts of carryovers here from the vehicle. Okay, chain and sprocket. Okay? Tubular steel, which the bike industry had invented. Tension spokes, pneumatic tires, disc brakes, a drive shaft. Right. Also, the system of manufacturing. All of that transfers from all that technology goes from the bicycle to the vehicle. And a lot of the first those cycling manufacturers, those bike manufacturers, as the bicycle craze dies off, they end up building vehicles. Okay, Peugeot is one of about a dozen examples. Albert Pope does that. He names his e-car. He goes for electric cars. He names it the Columbia, which is the same as his signature bicycle, his safety bicycle, the Columbia. Right? Okay, so that's another big point. And here you have a whole bunch of those names of these different companies that get directly out of manufacturing of cycles and into vehicles. And then the third carryover is socially in the sport of bike racing, and that directly transfers to the sport of automobile racing. And you see that in motorbikes first. And you see that with Sylvester Roper. He builds one of the first motorcycles, definitely the first in North America. He also becomes the first motorbike fatality. He dies in a wipeout. In a bicycle race on a velodrome. Okay, and that gets to the fact that at this point in time, the big famous bike races around the world, especially in Europe, you start seeing cars entering bike races and initially losing because they're not very durable. Okay, and the first time this happens is the Paris to the coast, back to Paris bicycle race of 1,200 kilometers. This happens in 1891. A Peugeot quadricycle automotive vehicle enters the bike race. It doesn't finish, but that's the first time it happens. Okay, so automobiles lose typically because in anything involving distance, early cars have chronic breakdowns. Most never finish, especially these early one-cylinder internal combustion engine kind of vehicles. But that doesn't last. Technology is changing very, very fast, and you see that nowhere more clearly than in Daytona Beach. That's where that becomes the epicenter for the sport of trying to set land speed records with vehicles. So they're being clocked on that beach there in this big flat tidal area of Florida. The early winners in this area are electric cars, but steam cars turned out to be the fastest, and so like the twin engine Stanley is a very fast car indeed. By 1931, this Brit named Malcolm Campbell clocks 251 miles per hour in Daytona, okay, on a beach, which is 404 kilometers an hour. And Daytona it's not instantly where NASA NASCAR will get started. Okay, yeah, the first official NASCAR race is at Daytona Beach in 1948. Okay, that's a whole other story. First auto race in Canada is Winnipeg in 1901, and Montreal gets a Grand Prix circuit eventually, but well before that, by World War I, you have racing at the CNE grounds in Toronto, including something called auto polo, which is kind of a hit to pass kind of thing. I don't know if you've ever been to a speedway, but hit to pass is definitely the funnest thing to watch. But so auto polo already in by World War I in Toronto. But yeah, eventually Montreal gets that Grand Prix circuit, Formula One, right by the 1960s. So yeah, racing becomes a pretty big thing here, auto racing here in Canada as well. Okay, so that is my lecture. That's the story and the glory, cycling, and I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions, 100%, let me know. Thanks for listening.